So I know I'm talking a little bit fast, but I'm also looking at the clock. So I know everybody needs to get back on time. So, and the other one was the World Health Organization declares the coronavirus a public health emergency. And this is the big news story now. And my concern is it's become such a big news story. Yes, this is a very serious outbreak, and yes, it has profound implications. But right now, I think we are maybe over-concerned. I have a question. Everybody in here, does anybody in here do business directly with China? Raise your hand. I see 1, 2, 3. 3 out of 175 people in the room. And obviously for you guys, you're concerned about it. But there are a lot of companies out there that don't. If you want to look at it, I checked just before I left the office today, 31,000 cases, possibly undercounted. There's some estimates there may be as many as 100,000 cases out there. But that's just an estimate. It's in 24 countries, mainly in Asia, 638 deaths as of 10 a.m. So I don't want to say I'm not concerned. I don't want to say because this is a very serious crisis. But you need to put this in perspective. Let me back one other thing. One of the reasons why we're also concerned is if you look at where growth is growing, please ignore my misspelling of emerging. If you look at where growth is going, Asia is where most of the growth is in the world. And so if something slows down growth in Asia and China, it will affect the rest of the world economy, and by extension, it will affect Houston. So put it in perspective, Spanish influenza, there were 500 million people infected with it and 50 million deaths at the turn of the last century. And more people died from the Spanish influenza than died in World War I. If you want to go back and everyone's comparing it to the SARS, this acute respiratory syndrome, there were fewer than 8,100 people infected, fewer than 714 deaths. And there's a lot of literature out there and a lot of studies. The Asian Development Bank has done a bunch of studies on this, trying to figure out how SARS will relate to the coronavirus. So that's so, but if you want to put that in perspective, and maybe you've heard this, look at the flu. There were 35 million people came down with the flu last year, last flu season. 810,000 hospitalizations. And from the flu in the U.S. alone, there were 61,000 deaths. So yes, the coronavirus is a concern, probably more of a concern because of the way the Chinese are trying to shut down parts of the economy management. But the flu every year, at this point, is a bigger threat than the coronavirus. And you can go and get this data. You can go to the Center for Disease Control, and they'll actually tell you how many people die of the flu every year. So that's where my data comes from. So if you want to look at the impacts that the coronavirus are having, obviously it's having on travel, entertainment, hotels, restaurants, and retail, mainly in Asia. All the flights have been canceled into Asia and out of Asia. So you're not having the air flights. Entertainment. You know, you need to separate this, the impact of the coronavirus in Asia, in the U.S., in the nature. Right now what's going on is when China said they're going to quarantine entire cities, 6 million people quarantined, there are restaurants that are not doing any business, there are grocery stores that aren't selling anything, there are retail stores that aren't selling anything. People aren't going out to concerts, or they aren't going out to the movie theater. That lost economic activity will never be recaptured. But if you are a company that has a contract with Apple to deliver 1 million phones, that contract is still in place. And when everything ends up, you're still going to need to go back to the factory and produce those 1 million phones, or the Nike shoes, or the other products that you've got a contract to do. Those contracts, unless they somehow declare null and void, which I doubt they're going to do. So what you're seeing is, on the top half, you have activity that simply won't take place. But a lot of economic activity is simply going to be pushed into another quarter. And what you're going to see is probably real weak first and second quarter numbers in China GDP growth. And then you're going to start to see it juiced up maybe in the third quarter because everybody gets back to work, the factories open back up, and they have to make up lost time to fill those in. If you want to get some idea, this is a study that the Asian Development Bank put together. And they looked at, there was a study done in Hong Kong at the height of the SARS outbreak, and they surveyed the population of Hong Kong. 26% of the respondents said they were concerned that they would catch the SARS virus during the SARS outbreak. Only 0.3% actually did. And that's part of the nature of this is that it's not, part of it's not just what the government's doing, but it's the way citizens are reacting to it. It's the staying at home, it's the same. And if you look at, anybody see the Chronicle this morning? This is both good and bad. Their front page story, coronavirus fears deal heavy blow to Houston economy. I mean, that's a bad headline. That's a really bad headline. If you read the story, I counted 33 paragraphs in the story. 22 of them deal about the impact the coronavirus is having on people not wanting to go to businesses in Chinatown in Southwest Houston. The other 11 paragraphs deal with either trade or oil. So you can see it's kind of blown a little bit out of proportion. But it gets back to people not wanting to go to business in Chinatown. Gets back to this sort of how you respond to an epidemic like this. Right now, in the U.S., we're okay, and I strongly feel we will be, but we are going to see some slower growth in the Far East. You know, I'd like to, one thing I tell you is just be wary of the data that's out there. I do think the Chinese are probably underreporting it. They're not real good at revealing the economic and statistical data to the rest of the U.S. or the rest of the world. But also, I see all these forecasts. I also tend to be wary of the forecasts because the forecasts are based on assumption. You have this model, but you have to make assumptions about infections, and assumptions about production, and assumptions about job growth. I've read reports about the impact on oil demand in China that said it's going to reduce demand for crude by anywhere from one article I read said 100,000 barrels a day, another said 3 million barrels a day. That's a widespread. So when someone says that model, I just ask you just a little bit of skepticism with that.